Okay, guys, we're going to just buzz through these principles one more time. It's just a way of just to do a little bit of review. All right. So, first thing is that one of the first principles is the idea of popular sovereignty, that the source of all power comes from the people, as noted in the Constitution, right? And we the people is the first three words in the Constitution, not we the states. So the founders wanted to make sure that it was understood that the power of government comes from the people. And we get that also from the Declaration of Independence, right? Because in the Declaration, it's the idea or the principle of the consent of the governed, that the permission of the people. The second principle is limited government. The Constitution limits the power of the national government. It's a rule book for which the government must follow to protect the rights of the people. In a monarchy, the national government holds most of the power. Under the Articles of Confederation, the states held most of the power. So they tried to look for a balance between the two. So the Constitution sets up what's considered a federal system of government. That's why we call it the federal government, all right? So federalism is the division of power between the states and the national government. And that's expressed in a number of ways. So let's look at that right now. First thing is that federalism, some of the definitions are: powers given to the national government are called delegated, powers that are granted to the state governments are called reserved, and powers that are shared by both are called concurrent. So in this graph that we looked at the other day in class, you have delegated powers like declare war, maintain armed forces, regulate trade, establish post office. These are all the powers only the national government can do. And the way the Constitution reads in Amendment 10 is that if it's not delegated to the national government and not prohibited to the states, it's reserved to the states. So because these issues over here in the yellow were not written in the Constitution, they're reserved to the states. So there's nothing in the Constitution of schools, so schools are state controlled. There's nothing about marriage laws, so states control marriage laws. So if it's not in the Constitution and delegated to the national government, it's reserved to the states. Then you have what are shared powers, all right? Taxes and borrow money being two of the extremes. So this is the diagram you should think of when you think of federalism: the division of power between the national government and the state governments. The fourth principle is separation of powers. The powers of government are separated among three branches. The executive, represented by the president, the job of the executive branch is to enforce the law. The legislative, the Congress, right, bicameral, two houses, and they make the law. And then finally, the judicial branch, the Supreme Court, which interprets the law. So the powers of government were divided under federalism and then separated through the three branches. We looked at this chart before. So the Constitution, the legislative branch, the House of Representatives and the Senate. The executive branch is the president and the vice president, and the judicial branch, the Supreme Court. So the powers of government were separated into three branches. Checks and balances. Each gives each branch of the government a way to check or control the other branches. Prevents too much power from falling into the hands of one part of the government. And we show this by this graph we've looked at before, right? That every power that one branch has, there's an equal and opposite power in another branch. All right, so that this system makes sure that one branch doesn't get too much power. So they divided power, federalism. They separated power of the three branches, and then they checked powers with checks and balances. Divided, separated, checked, because they were so afraid of power resting in one spot. The last principle of the Constitution is flexibility. The elastic clause is one way in which the Constitution is flexible. The powers of the national government not stated in writing, they are implied. The elastic clause says that Congress can make all laws that are necessary and proper. So it really expands the meaning of the Constitution. Example, child labor laws. They're not in the Constitution, but it's implied because the government has the power to regulate interstate commerce or interstate trade, and child labor might produce products that goes across state lines. Another example of it would be the post office. In the Constitution, it says that the government has the power to create post offices. So it's necessary and proper then to buy land to put a post office on. So necessary and proper means that the government can use powers to execute. They can use the elastic clause to execute powers that are in the Constitution, not beyond the Constitution. All right, so it stretches and strengthens and widens the power of the national government using this clause in the Constitution. Amendments are another way in which the government can expand power and also adapt to changing times. It's additions to or changes to the Constitution. Both Congress and the states must agree. There are 27 amendments to the Constitution and the first 10 of the Bill of Rights. The last way in which the Constitution is flexible or adaptable is that the Supreme Court and lower courts can review cases, and this involves interpreting laws and government action. These interpretations may change over time. In one generation, a law might be considered constitutional. In another way, it might be considered unconstitutional. So the judicial branch can interpret laws in different ways. Okay, so I wanted to keep it under 6 minutes, and I'm at 5:38, which is good. So what you're going to do is you're going to answer questions that are on the Schoology site. I'm going to leave them up here as well. You'll just write the number. You don't have to write out the whole question. Just write the number and the answer, and make sure you submit it through Schoology or in some other way. Write it on a piece of paper and send it as a photo through the Remind if you have to. So these are the questions. And again, answer the questions on a piece of paper or answer them in Schoology, 1 to 14, and submit them through the Schoology site or through the Remind. All right? If you have any questions, make sure you contact us through the Remind.